Well, hey everyone, this is Joe McNamee. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and mute everyone that's on the call. So hang on just a second here. Okay, so I have you muted right now. A little later on, I'll tell you what to do to unmute yourself for question and answer time. So let's just kind of leave it like this for right now. A lot of times there's a lot of background noise and other people being on there without the calls being muted. So we're just gonna leave everyone muted for at this time, and then once I get to a good stopping point, then I'll unmute. So as you're listening to this incredible, crazy story, write your notes down, write your questions down so that you don't forget it. And I promise you, I'm gonna go through several different things that occurred with this property. So right now, I'll just let you know what we're doing. We're sitting out next to the pool. This is one of the places that I love to go. I've got a back porch and my in-ground pool in my backyard, and it's a place where I like to go and plan my marketing techniques and tactics and create new ideas for marketing, for bringing in more buyers and more sellers for my real estate world, and then bringing in more professionals that want to connect with me to move my business forward so that we can reach out and help more people for a fair profit. But it's just one of our favorite places to go and do that. It's kind of peaceful and quiet. So without further ado, let me go ahead and jump into this story. So I'm going to take you back. I'm going to say, I can't remember exactly, it's about 8 or 10 years ago. I bought a small piece of property on a state highway. So I teach my students in my advanced training how to get in the way of progress. So this 2-acre tract of land was definitely in the way of progress. And it was before the real estate crash. So I bought that property. I think I spent like, I don't know, $18,000, $20,000 on it. But it was a piece of property that I knew would become commercial, and I knew that the road would be widened. Of course, when the city or county gets involved and buys land from you when they're widening, that ends up being extremely profitable. I could tell you several stories about me doing that and having other people do that and how much they've gained from doing it. I had one person that sold the amount of land in front of their office complex that equaled 4 parking places, and that turned out to be worth a little over $600,000 profit to them just by allowing 4 parking places to be bought from them. But anyhow, so I bought this piece of land, and I had planned on staying in the way of progress and keeping the property until it became extremely valuable from a rezoning commercial perspective. Now, at this time when I'm buying it, it's a residential property. So I had the property. It was a wooded property. Nothing had ever been built on it. It was raw land. There's no water, no power, no sewer. And it had great road frontage. I think there was over 250 feet of road frontage on a state highway. So my father-in-law said to me, you know, Joe, I'd like to move out of the kind of hustle and bustle that goes on the outskirts of Savannah, but he's kind of like in Savannah, closer to the islands side, and we're on the opposite side out in the country. And I said, well, I just bought this piece of land, so if you are interested in having a house built on it, I'll be happy to build the house on it, and I'll give you the property for us to build your house on it, and I just won't do anything with it commercial. And so he kind of thought about it, and he decided, you know what, I think I'd like to do that. So I sold it to him, and I think I just added a couple $1,000s for costs that I had of the deal, and he bought the property. And then I had it set up with the neighbor who we had bought the land who I had bought the land from. So I set it up with that neighbor that if he ever wanted to sell the rest of the property, which was another approximately 4 acres that attached to that land, that he could get it, my father-in-law could get it at a really good discount. So I think about a year later, my father-in-law did that. He bought the rest of the land, which was another approximately 3 3/4, 4 acres, something like that. So now he's got a grand total of 6 acres, or just shy of that. Well, at least 8 years went by, maybe even 10. I kind of lost track of time. And he decided that he wanted to just sell the whole thing. He never built the house. He's still in the same house he's been in for, gosh, I'm sure it's been at least 30 years. So he never built on it and didn't decide to do anything with it. So he came back to me. We did a joint venture agreement, and we put the property up as potential commercial property. So now instead of it being 2 acres that I had bought, now he's got, and I think he's got about 40,000 in it, but we say 50 because there's incidentals, and we're just adding an extra 10,000 to it to say what he's actually got in it. So he's got $50,000 in a 5 3/4 acre tract of land on a busy highway that gets busier every day. The road has not widened yet, but it should be happening within the next 5 years or so. And put it up for sale for him, potential commercial. So we had several different bites on it, and one really solid one for $150,000. Okay, so that's not much of a profit, but we did nothing to it. He's got 50 tied up in it total, and this buyer was going to be paying him upfront money and then on time. So he was going to carry a mortgage on it, carry a loan, a note on it. And so that meant he was also going to be earning interest on it. And there's always the likelihood that the people get involved and then change their mind down the road and go do something else and give you the property back, which then you get to go get another down payment and start all over again with a new person, which makes it extremely profitable if people change their mind like that. Now, it's not what we intend on people doing, but it's a very common thing that people decide to do that just because life is what happens when people plan to do something else. They change their mind, they move on, they want to go a different direction. So we got the deal set up where he's going to make $100,000+ profit off this, and he's happy as all get out about it. So the buyer, we walked the property, and we didn't really go onto the property. It's wooded, but it's not real heavily wooded. But we walked down one of the side. It's an access easement for the power company, but there's no power to that land. But it goes right down the side of the property. So we walked down that, and the neighbor on the opposite side never came out, never said anything. Now, about a week or two later, the buyer decides to go and walk the property again and kind of zero in on their plans on what they want to do to create their rendition, their drawing of what they want to do so that they can put it in front of the council, and this happens to be in a city. So this is the city of Port Wentworth. So they wanted to put their plan in front of the city to get it approved for them to rezone it commercial, and it was going to be I think it was going to end up being just either B1 or PUD1. I'm not sure which way they were going, but it's probably PUD1 would have been good enough for them. And then they were going to slice off a sliver for their residents also. So they were going to have their house, a rental property, and the rest of it was all going to be commercial, and they're a trucking firm. So when they were there walking the land by themselves the second time, this little old lady on the right side of this property approached them. Now, I didn't know any of this was going on. We got the phone call later, but here's how the conversation went when she approached them. Oh, let me back up one time. On that second tract of land, my father-in-law knew this, that there was 2 grave sites. Oh, grave sites, okay? So there was 2 markers and 2 people that were buried, one in 1933 or 36, and the other one in 1944. And so everyone knew it was there, and they were on the property line. One was on one side of the property, and one was on the opposite side of the property. And so that was no big deal. Nobody was worried about that, concerned about that at all. So the lady that comes from next door comes over and has this conversation with my buyer saying, you know, my son, who's now probably close to my age, was he used to play in those woods there, and he found 20 grave sites. Now, 20 grave sites is altogether different than the 2 grave sites that we knew were there, the 2 markers. And that was on the piece of land that my father-in-law bought, not the piece that he got from me. Okay, so the lady seemed like she was full of baloney and all this kind of stuff. So the buyer calls me and tells me what happened. And I said, well, you know what? I'm going to call my father-in-law, and we're going to walk every inch. He and I will both go walk every inch of that property looking for these other 20 grave sites or 20 or other 18 grave sites. So we went there. We met there, and we walked every inch. We combed that property, every inch of that property. No other markers, no other grave site markers of any way, shape, or form. There were 2 markers. There are 2 markers. We saw them. We wrote down the names and the dates and all that kind of stuff. And then we saw that there was another marker laying right next to one of those markers that had no markings on it. So it could have been something that was laying there. At this time, we figured it could have been something that was laying there that was part of the original grave, or it could be a second grave right next to that grave. Right next to it. Okay, now so keep in mind now, this whole story is going to become extremely bizarre in just a little bit here. All right, we're not the first ones that have bought property, and there's been people buried on property. But let me just keep going with this story now. Okay, so the next thing that happens is we call the lady back and say, we're kind of upset with her because she is scaring our buyer, and there's no evidence of anything that we could see that had anything to do with another 18 or 20 grave sites. So she gives us her son's phone number. We call him, and he goes, oh, there's no markers. He said there's these metal stands that people would put flowers in, and he discovered them years ago when he got a metal detector, and they're laying there underneath of many, many, many years of leaves and stuff. So it's like, oh, wait a minute. Now that kind of sounds a little bit different here. So we went back and we combed the property again. And when we were on the phone with the son, we said, well, what made you take a metal detector and go to these certain spots? He said there's little indentations in the land. You can't even hardly tell it unless you're really, really, really looking for it. So we went back and we walked the land again. And the first thing I wanted to do was go back to those 2 grave sites where we saw the 2 markers plus the potential third one and look at the way that the land looked at those markers. Sure enough, there's a little indentation in the land. So then we started looking for that same exact type of indentation, and we discovered a whole lot more than 20 indentations. Now, some of it could be trees rotted and different things happening, but it kind of looked the same as what those 2 graves were. So now it's like I looked at him and I said, what's your gut feeling? Do you think there's more grave sites on this property than these 2? And he said, yes, I really think so. I said, okay, well then let's go ahead and contact the buyer and undo the deal. If they want to undo it, undo the deal, and just let everybody just go back to square one with this property. So that's what we did, and the buyer was happy with that. Matter of fact, they looked at a different piece of land that I had that they thought would work out a little bit better, and so we're kind of back and forth with them on that one. But they were happy that we honored. We didn't have to because it said it was non-refundable and all, but we still undid the entire deal. Doing the right thing is very important. Okay, so now the very next thing that we do is I started trying to put together, and of course my father-in-law is now going, he went from spending, let's say, just $50,000 being worth $150,000. So in his mind, he's figured that he's lost at least $100,000 now, and he's figured that there's nobody that's going to want to even give him $50,000 to just get his money back. And I said, now wait a minute. His first name is Tom. I said, now wait a minute, Tom. Let's just try to dig into this a little bit further, because I'm really curious about how this whole thing took place. Well, simultaneously, while we're doing all this, while we're looking at this and talking to the buyer and talking to the lady next door and all this kind of stuff, my wife, Victoria, decides to go research at the courthouse to determine the names of those two markers, who they were, and what the death certificate said. So she finds them pretty easily, and they said on the death certificate that these people were buried in a cemetery called Meinhardt Cemetery. Well, there isn't a cemetery called Meinhardt Cemetery. It does not exist. There's no such cemetery as that, but yet it's on the death certificate. Okay, so now we've got two death certificates, and my wife became a little bit more inquisitive, because on a death certificate, you can find out more things like what's your wife's name and things like that. So the one man where he was buried, remember there was a marker that was, there was nothing, you couldn't read anything, nothing was legible on it, but it was kind of a fancy scrolled piece of thin concrete laying right next to his gravesite. So she decided to look up who his wife was, and then, or see, look up the wife's death certificate, because this is back in the 30s when this man was, I can't remember if he was in the 30s or in the 40s. I think he was in the 30s. So she looks the wife up, and lo and behold, a year later, the wife died in a house fire and was buried in Meinhardt Cemetery. And again, there is no such cemetery called Meinhardt Cemetery. Okay, so now the plot kind of thickens here. By the way, one of the individuals was in the military, and their unit and everything that they were in is on the gravestone. So that was one that Uncle Sam made just specifically for that death. Now, keep listening, because now it's going to take a little turn. So the next thing is, we have people buried on this property. We possibly have more people buried on this property that is referred to on death certificates as Meinhardt Cemetery, but that cemetery does not exist. So now we're starting to get interested in what's going on here from a historical perspective. So we got a hold of a couple of historians. We went to a couple of museums for the local area, and we started being a little bit inquisitive. Well, on the left side of the property, that's where the man lives that my father-in-law bought the property from. And then when we called him and talked to him about, hey, do you know anything about there being 20 grave sites on this property? He said, no, there are the two headstones on the property, and that's all there are. I've been on that property for years. I used to ride dirt bikes on it when I was a lot younger, and blah, blah, blah. I think this man is probably in his late 60s, early 70s. So we said, okay, well, there's a question and there's a thought that there might be more grave sites on this property. And he said, well, I can give you the name of the person I bought it from, and as a matter of fact, I have his phone number and everything, because I bought it from him many years ago, and let's see what he says about what's on this property. So we figured, okay, that we're going to chase this, and that's going to be, we're not going to hear anything from this guy. Well, we actually did. We got a call back from that guy, and he said that it was his father's property, and it was his grandfather's property. So his family has owned that property for over 150 years. Okay, so now we have 150 plus years of ownership and no one knows anything more than these two grave sites that are on the property. They both said, look, we don't know anything about, anything more, no 18 other graves and all this kind of stuff. So now let's go back to us meeting up with one of the historians, local historians, and they told us about a church which is on the left side of the person that's on the left side of this property that my father-in-law had bought the property from originally. So this church is called North Salem Baptist Church. It was established on that spot in 1823. So now when you're facing this land, it's 2 properties to the left is where this church is. Behind the church is a regular type cemetery, an old type cemetery dating back to the early 1800s. But the land of the church goes behind the house of the next door seller and touches this land where these grave sites are potentially at, or possibly at. So now it's like, there's a connection here, and it's starting to look very interesting. Now, the first thing that came to my mind at that point right there was that, hey, I wonder, in the 1860s, slavery was in effect. I wonder if the cemetery behind the church was where people were buried, and then, white people were buried, let's just say, and then slaves were buried over off to the side. Now, we don't know if it was a field or woods. Now, we'll get into a map that we got that dates back to the 1700s of that area, and I'll tell you about that because it's extremely important next. So the historian said there were definitely slaves buried, and they were buried over in that vicinity. And so now it's like, wait a minute, what do you mean in that vicinity? Well, to the right of the man that, we're talking about sold us the property, there were people that would go to grave sites there in the woods, which they're referring to my father-in-law's land. So now, no one has gone there or talked to him about, can I visit my relatives' grave sites on your property? No one, the guy living next door who's lived there for many years, never saw or heard any of that kind of stuff. But he didn't own the land back in the 1940s, which is the time that we can tell the last person was buried in 1944 is what we can tell at this point in time. So then the historian got into the locals and the stories that they tell, and one man is in his 90s and still is sharp as a tack and tells all different kinds of things that went on all different places, and referred to this piece of land as where a lot of relatives and slaves were buried. So now it's like, okay, in a cemetery that doesn't exist, no one knows about this piece of land except for hearsay going on 80, 70, 60, 90 years ago. Well, other people that are members of that church that are in their 80s and 90s said they remember as little kids burials that happened over there. Now, it could be the 2 burials that, the 2 people that we're talking about that we can see the markers on. But we still have these 20 grave sites or 18 more grave sites that have the metal flower holding arrangement. Now, I don't know in what year that metal holder was actually used on, at graves, but I'm sure that it was before the 1900s. So now we're looking at this and we're going, okay, there's a good possibility that there are a lot of people buried here, and some of them are slaves or, were slaves at that time. So now it's like there's something that we can do to connect these families to loved ones who were buried and no one knows where, and no decent records were taken, made of this. Okay, so now remember, my wife researches the markers, the names of the people that we know their names and the dates and everything, matches them up to the death certificate and then finds that they're buried in this Meinhardt Cemetery. Oh, by the way, right down the road, there's a road that turns off to the side of it, to the side of that road, maybe a half mile down or so, that's called Meinhardt Monteith Road. Okay, so now, someone who's signing these death certificates are identifying where these remains, these people are buried by being buried in a cemetery named Meinhardt Cemetery. Again, that doesn't exist. All right, so then we start studying a little bit more, and the historian reveals to us that going the opposite way, so if you're standing on the road facing the land to the right, instead of to the left where the church is, to the right, not more than a quarter of a mile down the road, is an old camp that is a Civil War camp site. Now, it's also believed, no one has proved to us, but it's also believed that that camp site was originally a Revolutionary War camp site. Now, I was looking at it. I'm retired military. I was a tactician and an officer, and paid attention to a lot of different logistical and strategic sites and uses of land and all. And I'm looking at the land, and I'm thinking, I don't see any positive thing here at all that makes me feel comfortable that this military camp was even in this spot, this a quarter mile down the road. My daughter, Heather, who's starting to minor in archaeology, said, well, there could have been a significant river or waterway back in that day that made it where it was a sensible place to be. And, of course, back in that day, if that's the case, then oxen and horses and other things were used to, other animals were used to pull rafts and barges and stuff like that down small rivers. And there's a lot of those around here. Okay, so now here comes the map that dates back to the 1700s, and lo and behold, on this map, it shows the road, the highway, which is it's called Highway 30, but the road is there, and where the bend is, where the camp is supposed to have been, behind that and behind my father-in-law's property and behind the church, there's a small natural branch back there, which might be a tiny little stream that you might be able to make a boat that you'd hold in your hand and ride it down there and run into a bunch of bushes, because it's not a decent river or anything like that to be able to sail a regular boat or ride a regular boat down. But in the map in the 1700s, that river that today is just a little branch, that was a major river. It was drawn much larger than the road is drawn on that map. So, and it just so happens that there's a little jetty that comes in off of that river in that day, right where the camp site was believed to be. So now all of a sudden, strategically, it makes sense. All right, so now picture this, and right now we got some guesswork going on, but picture this. If you have a campsite, a military site, you're dealing with Civil War or Revolutionary War stuff, or both, you're going to have people who have died that are going to be coming to those camps, being brought back to those camps. And if you're a quarter of a mile down the road or down the river from a place that is known for people being buried, which is a cemetery that's not a official cemetery, but a cemetery, would you be burying those remains at that site? And the answer is, of course. So now there's the possibility that we may find Civil War and Revolutionary War soldiers or people that were involved in that stuff at that time buried in this vicinity also. Okay, so now we can see this historical connection. We can see this story. And so now the question is, how do we take a $50,000 mistake, and the mistake is not walking the land, and turn it into a profit? So the first thing is, I want you to think about this. According to the grandson, who's, in his 50s or 60s or maybe even 70s, according to the guy next door, that was the seller, no one knew that there was any more than these 2 grave sites on this property. Then my wife figures out that there's 3 grave sites based on that the wife dying a year later, and it's saying on the death certificate that this is this person also is buried in Meinhardt Cemetery. So what kind of secret was being kept with people being buried on a property that no one knew was happening? So back in the 30s or 40s, did the grandson's father or grandfather own this at that time, and was he giving the blessing for people to be buried on this land? You can't just go bury someone anywhere. But and we're talking about not the ones happening back in the 1800s, but I'm talking about the 2 in the 1900s. Who gave the permission for that military burial to occur? Who gave the permission for the other burial to occur? And then why was it not discussed in that family for that 150 to 200 years? No one knew anything about this. And that's making an assumption, but we feel pretty confident when we had that conversation with the guy. It doesn't matter to him. He sold the property a long, long, long time ago. But he's not responsible. The guy that sold it to my father-in-law is not responsible. No one knew this. So now we've got this secret. We've got a bunch of hearsay. And so now it's time to discuss the next point, which is, okay, we got to find out if there's really anyone buried. Are there any human remains on this property? So now we've found this company that's actually local, who have what's called a ground-penetrating sonar. This is a piece of equipment that's designed to go over top of land where you suspect there could be human remains, and it takes a picture of the land, and it lets you know if there are, human bones there, remains there. I guess it can detect bones and teeth. I'm making that assumption. But so that's the next thing that's going to be done. So these people will be coming in to do that. Now, there's 2 reasons for that. One is to find out if anybody's really buried there or not, to end the possibility of more people than those 2 grave sites. And is there anybody at those 2 grave sites? It could just be a memorial and not, their remains could be somewhere else. And it could be in a cemetery that used to be called Meinhardt Cemetery, and now it's named something different, and no one knew the original name. I don't know. But this is what we believe. We believe that everyone back in that day called that Meinhardt Cemetery, and we believe that there's more people buried there, and we believe that the ground-penetrating sonar will let us know that. So now let's take this into the financial world for a minute. So now this means that my father-in-law owns a cemetery. So if it is a true cemetery, and I'm going to talk about finding other death certificates in a few minutes, finding out if there's any other death certificates that say Meinhardt Cemetery on it. But now we're sitting here with, where is land that has no one buried on it, on this property, that he can then subdivide off, connect with all the families of all the people that did get buried there, and see if the families want to be buried with their ancestors. And so then that means that he can then sell, and I think at a discount, it would be a great idea, but sell burial plots on this same property and call it Meinhardt Cemetery. Now, of course, there's all kinds of issues that, all kinds of legal issues and stuff like that. But if it was already identified as a cemetery, then a lot of the headway, a lot of the things that he would have to, hoops that he would have to jump through to get get it identified as a cemetery, would already be taken care of for him. So it could almost be a rubber stamp, and we're not sure about that. We still have, lots of legwork to do. Okay, so now let's go back. So financially, you can see we can make hundreds of thousands of dollars off of selling burial plots on this land. Then we also have different organizations that would be interested in historical organizations, and let's reconnect family members together and people who would be interested in funding a lot of different things about this whole situation. Now think about from the perspective of books and a movie and a documentary and a historical, all of that stuff is all very easy to do by pulling in publicity and marketing what's going on and what we're finding and all that kind of stuff. So every time you look at a death certificate, there's a huge story to be told, especially if you research the people that are surviving the individual that the death certificate is written for. And so you can connect families and friends for over 2 centuries right here with this discovery. At the same time, we've got the Civil War and the Revolutionary War connection that could also spawn into something else, something more than what I just described. Now, there's so many more things that we can do with this. The only, and people are going to constantly be asking an update on it and all that kind of stuff. The only thing I will tell you is my father-in-law isn't a guy that thinks like me. He is a guy that he just wants, it's black and white, and he just wants to be done and over with things. He doesn't have the creativity, and he just doesn't want to be bothered with all that. So we're sitting here with, okay, here's all these different things that we can do, but does he want to? And he's trying to decide that right now. I think he's pretty solid on we need to get the ground penetrating sonar there, because if there are no remains, then there's no one buried there, and so then he can go back to selling it right back to the same buyers that wanted it to begin with, because there are actually no grave sites on the property. Now, of course, we feel pretty confident that there are, but that I'll call it a GPS. That GPS will tell us that for sure. Okay, so I have to be patient and let him kind of ingest everything and let him think about it, and then let him make the decision as to, are we going to go wild with this or not? Now, obviously it takes a lot of time to do this stuff. I'll probably, if we do get involved in doing this, I'll probably put in some people from colleges and stuff to help us. We'll probably do it that way, to do research on different things. Let them spend the time researching the stuff, because I certainly can't take that kind of time from my 4 businesses. But anyway, right now, my best guess, if everything was, if everything fell in line properly with the way that I think it would, if he were willing to, I think right around $1 million would be a realistic number on that piece of property. Now, 1 million things can go wrong with that. 1 million things can change that. But that's the most bizarre real estate deal that I've ever been part of. So I just wanted to share it with you. I'm going to go ahead and unmute everyone here. So let's see here. As a matter of fact, what you can do is you can unmute yourself by hitting *6 and ask questions. So if you'd like to ask a question, just hit *6, and that'll unmute you, and you can go ahead and ask a question. Okay, let me do this one time here. Okay, now I've just unmuted everyone, so go ahead and ask a question. If you have any questions about any part of this. By the way, this is a property that I could have easily, when I first bought the first 2 acres, I could have easily done it with $10. But remember, this was nearly 10 years ago. It was more beneficial to write checks for those types of deals in that day and age. So I wrote a check for that property. I didn't do it with $10. In this economy, I would never write that check. It would be a $10 takeover. So go ahead and ask questions. Okay.
You kind of
Okay, go ahead. Who is this?
This is Jeff.
Jeff Owen?
Yeah, Jeff Owen.
Hey, Jeff. Go ahead.
Hey, man. Well, you kind of explained things pretty thoroughly. I guess you're going to go to. I guess the question I have is, you said you're going to get people from colleges. I guess you're talking about people mastering in history and stuff to go out and. What do you expect them to do? What do you want them to find?
Well, it's going to be a study. They can do digs, and they can do digs on that property and look for Civil War and Revolutionary War relics. You know, just because a campsite is identified, let's say with a grid, that doesn't mean that's where that campsite was, and it was only in that one spot. I mean, a campsite back in that day could have easily been a half a mile in diameter. So did the campsite reach all the way to that property? If it did, what is sitting there on the back of the branch that borders the back of that property? It's a significant drop off too. When you walk back there, you see that roll way down. Think about like a canal that doesn't have a river in it. That's in the woods. That's what's back there. So what kind of relics could be sitting there? I know my daughter, Heather, she was part of a dig. I think it was Camp Lawton is what it was called, in Georgia. Probably a or 2 drive from the college. And they would go there once a week. And the professor was always worried because the site was used as a training aid for him, for his class. But the professor was always worried that they would find human remains because they found human remains of a cemetery. Then the whole thing gets stopped. The government comes in and spends 3 to 6 months trying to identify, was this a murder and blah, blah, blah and all. So it kills his training aid for the class. So the colleges in this field, the colleges use real live places for doing their work. They're doing class study that is actually out in the field doing the process of digging and searching and identifying and categorizing and blah, blah, blah. And so that's the first thing on the historian side. The next thing is, if we have a third-party agency, so to speak, so the school, who is corroborating our story, who's backing up what we're saying, then it becomes a much more powerful image for the world of having a book done, having a movie done, having a documentary done, and of course using those for other marketing messages that are going on out there to bring in more people who might be interested in contributing to could be done with this property and for the families and all that. Okay?
Yeah.
So it's not just, hey, this house needs a little bit of work, and this much a month, and I can make this much more a month off of it, and that kind of thing. So, that was your question, though. What is it that we would bring the historians in for?
Yeah, what would you have them be doing and such? And that pretty much answers that. This could have been a field that was a field that people
held religious ceremonies on. I mean, it could have been, you have to think about back in when was slavery abolished? Was that 1865 or so? Somewhere in that vicinity, that time frame. But in those places, were blacks allowed in that church? I don't know.
Right.
My guess is they may not. Was that site over there where they held their church? Maybe there's some things that are left over from that going on. I mean, we're just guessing. There could be a million different things. There could be nothing there. Some pine trees. But there's so many things that could have happened and could be there. I'm still absolutely blown by the secrecy of, someone's asking if they can be buried there, or someone's heirs are asking, can their relative be buried there in the 1930s and 1940s? Why would they want to be buried there, out in the woods? So it's just, I mean, it's these two cemetery plots, these grave plots, are probably about 600 feet off of, maybe 500 feet off of the road, the main drag there, out in the woods. So,
it has to do with memories. I mean, I would think that that location has a good memory for them or something, and that's why they wanted to be buried out there.
Right, and think about it now. This other guy that's the grandson, he's actually a retired commercial pilot. He said that his family has owned that property. His father owned it and his grandfather owned it. So it's been in their family for 150 years or more. And so it wasn't like the people that are buried there's property. It wasn't theirs. So what is that memory? I mean, Jeff, what could that be? Why is that so special to them? And again, it was a burial ground, in our opinion, for their loved ones, for their grandparents or their parents or, maybe friends or people that they looked up to. Maybe as kids that there was elderly people dying and being buried there on the site.
Gotta be.
What happened? So there's a lot of things that could be uncovered there. And so, I kind of tease around with my father-in-law. His first name is Tom, and so this gives a whole new meaning to the word Uncle Tom's Cabin. But anyway, yeah. So, and those of you that don't understand, Harriet Tubman and Uncle Tom's Cabin, those were instrumental in helping people who were slaves, and they were sneaking out, getting away from being slaves. And so Uncle Tom's Cabin was a place that they could stop and get food and rest to be able to continue on their journey to escape. It's the whole thing is just so bizarre, and there's so much more to it. There's so many people right now that are kind of helping search. We have discovered that the death certificates in the courthouse is still antiquated. It's still a manual system. So it's not digitized. It's not automated. But what we're going to do is we're going to put some interns into the courthouse, and we're going to have them research that district, because those districts were referred to way back then. We're going to have them research that district, those districts, and those dates, going all the way back to like 1823, and looking for any death certificate that says that the person is buried in Meinhardt Cemetery. So that would identify, if we find one more than the three that we already know, if we find one more, then that also whatever that word is, that also,
corroborate.
Yeah, that one too, Jeff, thank you. But that also ties the whole thing together and brings what we feel went on there. Now, what if we find some Civil War soldiers buried there, or Revolutionary War soldiers buried there, and it's on death certificates. Now we've got another whole dimension in this site. So, and then the last part of this is the boundaries that are there today were not there back in the 1800s. So that means that there could be on the neighbors' properties and other places on that church property, people buried there also.
Do you ever run into the risk of it being such a national treasure that the government steps in and says, we're going to take your land because it holds such historical significance?
Eminent domain, kind of plays a role when a road gets to go through that. When it's a historical or if it's suspected of foul play and all that kind of stuff, Uncle Sam gets to step in and do their whole thing, and your hands are tied. Now, the God's honest truth, Jeff, I don't have any experience with this. This is new for me. This is extremely bizarre, so I don't know what route this would go. But no matter what, a story can be written about it for a profit.
Good point. Now, the other question you made me curious about is you were going to hire a couple of interns to go in and do the research. Can you explain?
I said I was going to get interns. You used the word hire.
Yeah, I did. You're right. So how do you go about doing that?
College. Let's say you want interns to work for you in your business. Let's go out of the world of archaeology. Let's say you want them to get to the world of your business and you want them to make phone calls or market for you. You can get with colleges. You can get with business management, financial management, marketing type students, and get with the professors and look for them wanting to allow you to use them for a project. Some of them have to do their own paper, and they need to document so many hours of doing a certain type of – because think about an intern that works at a hospital. Back in the day, way back, they used to be referred to as a candy striper if they were in college. Some of them weren't even in college. They were just on. They didn't get paid. They just were but you can do that.
Cutting out.
You can do that same kind of thing with anything at all. If in the world of what it is that they're learning to be, like art. They can go to a very picture look, and they can practice trying to draw or that view. But they're not probably going to get paid for that, but it's just practice for them. So the same thing with this. It's a class project. It's a hands-on class project, and they get a grade for it, or they get the experience for it, but they've got to do it,
It's a real-world experience then. Okay.
And so you're getting with college, with the professors, and seeing who it is that and how you can work together. And some are going to say, we don't do that, and then others are going to say, well, I'm not really sure. We hadn't thought about that. And then some are going to say, oh, we do that all the time. So
I got you. Thanks.
You're welcome. Okay. Well, that's the story. And there's a lot of pieces of information there. If you followed it, you saw that land was bought cash. You saw that I was able to put it up for sale, do a joint venture with someone when I didn't own the property later on, and I put it up for sale and look for a buyer and find a really sweet buyer. Let's just assume that there were no graves on the property. That's the same thing you can do. You can jump in. You can do takeover, get in the way of progress, look for a state highway or in the way of where progress is going to be. It could be a city road, a busy city road, and you can take over a piece of property with an option to purchase. That option to purchase can be for many years. It doesn't have to be 90 days or something like that. You just got to pay attention to your statute of limitations in your state. Your investor-friendly attorney will help you with that. But put your option to purchase in place, knowing that the progress is going to happen. How do you find out? By attending your town meetings and seeing who's growing what plans, what roads are coming in, where are big stores getting planned out to go in. Like, when I built my last office building, I knew there was going to be 900 new home sites built all around where my building was being put, and now they're building them. They started and they stopped, and now they've started again. I knew that a monorail was coming in. I knew all those kind of things, and so I put myself in the way of progress. So you put yourself in the way of progress with $10, and you control as much land as you want that way, and then you look for someone to either want to buy you out to get you out of the way, or develop it yourself and be part of the progress that's going on there and ride that gravy train. So there's a lot of different things that went on there. Now, all of a sudden, the whole world comes crashing down because Murphy lives everywhere, and poof, okay, we got a bunch of bodies possibly on this property. And I don't mean to be cold about it. These are human beings, but there's a bunch of, oh, no, what the heck are we going to do? People are, worried about that. They're superstitious and, all that kind of stuff. Those kind of fears come into play and all. And it's like, okay, well, I need poltergeist. I don't want to build anything on that either. I'm not going to do that. But the bottom line is, how can you still turn that around and make it beneficial to others while still making a fair profit? So I hope you learned a little bit of something there on how you can deal with situations and what to look for. And, oh, by the way, make sure you walk your property. If you're going to buy something that's got some land, then put on the boots, put on long sleeves, long pants. If you're in an area where there's snakes and stuff, make sure that you got snake bite boots and all that kind of stuff, and spray yourself down so that you don't end up with chiggers and, poison ivy and all that kind of stuff, and walk your land or get someone else to do it that you trust will really do it for you. Not just look at your corners or your boundary markers, but look at the land, what's on it. But anyhow, okay, with all that said, I am going to bid you a good night. And, by the way, I think it's the 9th of July, there is a webinar coming up, and then there's another one after that. They're very important webinars. I've been out of the loop for a while with my students because we had so many real estate deals going on all at the same time. I had to back away from students for a while. I'm back. We've got all those caught up. We still got deals happening every week, but we don't have dozens of deals happening every week anymore. So you got a lot of good training coming your way. My brand new advanced boot camp is coming out in September. We haven't set the date yet, but we'll be letting you know about that coming up here shortly too. So stay tuned. There's a lot coming your way. All right. Good night now.